Okay, great. We are back. We're back again. I hope everybody is as well. So let me remind you. Let me ask you one more time that you can. You're very welcome to ask questions in the chat or to raise your hand, and we will try to pick it up. So encourage everyone to share their thoughts. Really, we have quite some time for doing that, and to the extent that your questions are also addressable to more than one speaker, I think that would be even better. So let me start on my hand with just maybe one quick question to all our speakers, which is what do you see to be the target audience for your masterclass? I think we really have one theme, which is that, of course, of digital or digitized cultural heritage, but you take it from very, very different perspectives. And a masterclass, at least as it is set up now, needs to be somewhat cohesive and to keep it manageable and effective. So people in the audience and broadly when we will announce them might be wondering, is it really the right event for me? What will I get out of it, etc. So could you please tell us who you think would most benefit from your masterclass and why? And if I may, then maybe keep the same ordering here if you would like to go first.
Thanks, Giovanni. That's a great question. I think broadly, the masterclass is useful for people who are considering creating crowdsourcing or citizen history projects to understand what's involved, typical tasks and the kinds of typical outcomes or outputs, but also for people who might be working with crowdsourced data to understand how it's created, how they can work with other departments and other institutions to ensure that they're getting high quality, reliable data in whatever format that they need it. And I think there's also some interesting bridging work between people who do public engagement, which increasingly marketing think of themselves as being engagement, but it's a different kind of engagement, or people who work with volunteers and want to find ways to either deepen participation or move some of that participation online.
Fantastic. I think it was really clear. How about you, Stefania? You're muted.
Sorry, I missed the question. I was
no,
pouring my.
Not to worry at all. So my question, I'll just repeat it briefly. So my question was, who do you think is the ideal target audience for your masterclass and why? And by ideal, I just mean who do you think would be positioned to get the most out of your masterclass?
Well, I think lecturers, teachers, maybe even high school, but also curators or archivists of libraries that would like to do an educational project with the group of people who are not yet digitally skilled. Mm-hmm. So I can think that if you want to engage people, but you come from zero, I think Ranke is a very useful resource to lay a kind of basis for, okay, then if you don't know this, don't know that, then do that assignment, then do that assignment. And I can even imagine that you could curate a new lesson on Ranke if you want to have one kind of little pre-course that people take with the quizzes and with basic knowledge and clips that you put together. You're very welcome to contact Ranke, the University of London. It wants to be a platform, so you can also ask space if you have time and you have material. Putting it up is in there is quite easy. It's a structure in GitHub with Jekyll. The only very intensive part is creating an animation that takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, but that's not necessary. You know, if you have a very good TED lecture or a very good, you can take that as a reference point. And what we also have in the sections, you have the medium, the small, medium, but we also have the possibility for a large, which is a tutorial for a workshop. So I would say anyone who wants to bridge the gap between the digital and the non-digital. And so they can fairly easily lay a basis. Actually, one of my ideas was to do an introductory test like they sometimes do for literacy and writing tests when students come to university, to include a digital skill test and then see what the outcome is, what the level is, and then have a whole kind of path that they can take to skill up their, and for this purpose, I think Ranke would be very useful.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's very clear. A follow-up, actually, quickly, is the skill level of the lectures. So you mentioned that it's really in particular for people that don't have, let's say, digital skills, right? But would like to bridge that gap still. Is that correct?
Well, not exactly. Sometimes they have, but they don't know that we created the Internet Archive tutorial. So they spend a lot of their precious time with students who get completely lost. So there are a lot of assets that can also be used by lecturers who already teach. But there are a lot of explanations which are already unknown to the digital. For instance, the difference between the web and the net and the internet, and how web technology evolved over time, and what this means for updating and changing websites. All these kind of issues are tackled in the lessons. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Mia, sorry, may I come back to you with the same question about the skill level of participants as well?
Yeah, I tend not to assume any prior skills in this, but I find in discussion that people's previous experience is often quite relevant and gives us richer examples to discuss. So I design structurally with the assumption that there's no experience, but very much welcome people that experience that people might not have realized has relevance in the subject.
Super. Okay, thank you so much. Arianna, James, would you like to take the target audience question up?
I would say anyone involved in building digital projects in a research, university or GLAM sector, and cross-disciplinary. So we're obviously focused in the humanities, but the lab's methods are quite generic. So it would actually apply to social sciences and even the sciences as well. So research software engineers, obviously, but also humanists, archivists, librarians, and I think from entry level on up, actually. So I think I don't know what you think, Arianna, but I think the core of the masterclass needs to be people who are actively involved in building, and it doesn't matter whether it's you're part of a team or working alone. We sort of view our methods like a Lego box. So even if you are you're a contractor working on a 6-month contract, or you're just starting out, there should be something that you'll be able to take away from it. And I'd add, I think we should put, I shouldn't say that. I was going to say we should put managers at the back of the list, but I'm a manager. So, but I think we should. I mean, managers are another important potential audience. People who are looking at investing in a digital humanities or digital lab, whether it's in, regardless of context, who want to sort of have access to a Lego box and some of the frameworks and methods that we use and might like to deploy in their context. I don't know if you've got any other thoughts about that, Arianna?
I think you said it all. Maybe in terms of previous experience, the only thing I'll say that is that since the masterclass ideally will be sort of in a very participatory mode, the ideal would be for these people to have some experience of having been involved in digital projects of some kind at different levels. Obviously, that's very welcome, but maybe that's the only element that I'd say would be important.
Super. Okay.
I have
Stefania.
something to say. Emma, yes, I'm still on. I think it would be very good if they would take their curriculum with them. So this is what I teach. This is what I've done the last years, and let's enhance it. Let's pimp it. Let's do some more digital aspects with presentation or with grading or with a kind of different approach. I'm going to do that with university lecturer at the University of Leiden who teaches colonial conflict, and with Ranke as an example, I'm going to see how can we introduce the digital into the curriculum in different levels of complexity. So if there is a student who masters computer code or can work with a database or do text mining, but if there's someone at the next level, we do something lighter. I think that offering these opportunities in a supportive way would broaden the circle of lecturers and academics would engage with the resources we create.
Makes all sense, yeah. Thank you for that. So let me ask again to the audience. I mean, don't be shy, because personally I'm very happy. I mean, I have a lot of questions, so I'm very happy to keep going. But you know, this is your time to ask them. A big one from the audience. I don't know to what extent this a tangent or not. Mia, this is for you, but you decide. Which is if you could tell us a little bit more about your project, Collective Wisdom.
Yeah. So it's a funded project through the Arts and Humanities Research Council in the UK. And I applied with Megan Ferriter from Library of Congress, who I know from when she worked at the Smithsonian, and Sam Licken from Zooniverse. And we put together a proposal to write a book collaboratively that was capturing the kind of state of the art in crowdsourcing and citizen science and citizen heritage in cultural organizations and others. And it's partly to address the fact that a lot of what's known is not documented in formal publications. So there's a lot of practitioner knowledge, there's a lot of blogging, there's a lot of sharing that happens. But most of the formal academic work is in tangential related fields like computer supported cooperative work, human computation. So the shape of the field, if you look at professional documentation or academic documentation, isn't quite sort of represented accurately. So originally we were going to meet in Baltimore in April last year, which did not happen. So we worked with the Book Sprint group, who are a company who kind of facilitate people getting together. And in the olden days, in the before times, you'd write together for a week in a physical location. We did ours online and we split it out over 2 weeks of 5 days each, working quite long days to work across the US and UK time zones, and produce this book. It's a really quite incredible process because it's a very concentrated process of writing together. And because we all spend a lot of time thinking about experience design, we have a lot of feedback for the Book Sprints people on how to improve the process working remotely. So it was an interesting challenge trying to manage that on top of everything else. But the book that we produced, it's always been really important to us that it's not just our voices that are represented and not just our examples. The structure of the funding meant we could only have US or UK residents. But obviously crowdsourcing is an international idea. There are loads of different approaches in different countries. So the book that we wrote is now available as an open access publication, but we're also regarding it as a community peer review process. So as you read it, you might highlight text and just say something like, this would be useful in teaching, or you might nuance what we've said with another example or another reference. The only real constraint we've asked for people is not to be reviewer too. So, you know, don't go in guns blazing. If you can phrase things constructively, that would be really helpful. And that's partly because it's a very open public process, unlike other peer review where it all happens behind closed doors. So if someone's really nasty, it's sort of there for everyone to see. And we're running that open peer review until about August. And then at the same time, we're looking for a more traditional publisher. So we'll have a kind of second edition of the book that includes more voices and more perspectives. So thanks for that question.
Fantastic. Well, I think it's really great. So if anyone wants to take a look and also review one or three, not two, they are welcome to do so. Mia, can I also ask you another question that is of interest to me in particular, and it's probably also addressed in that book, but in a nutshell, if you were to provide some rules, some thinking principles for a newly started project that would consider using citizen science and crowdsourcing, what would you recommend? I mean, can you distill that in a kind of decision-making process?
So the book turned out to be 90,000 words. It turns out there was a lot of thoughts that were waiting to emerge. And the chapter on data is 10,000 words, but it really contains a lot of concentrated wisdom and hard-won experience in terms of how you work with data, how you process it, how you think about what you're getting from the process. I think it's a kind of iterative design process, but starting with your values is something that emerged really clearly in the writing process. And I think the events of the last year have helped us in cultural organizations think about how our collections relate to our publics and how our activities relate to our diverse publics. And because of models from some of the sort of harder social sciences where they might use Mechanical Turk and other paid forms of crowdsourcing, we're setting ourselves very much in contrast to that, partly in response to the fact that machine learning is becoming better and better at doing some of these tasks, and we want to ensure there's still generative, creative, generous space for people to encounter collections. So as well as thinking about workflow, how and why people might want to help your task or help your project, thinking about how you'll embed your values and how you'll ensure that your project represents your best face is probably one of the most important things that you can do at the start. So there's technical design aspects, there's workflow design aspects, there's metadata aspects, but also thinking about the kinds of relationships that you want and what your organization is saying to the world and how it sets up the project is a really important place to start.
Super. Thank you for that. There is a well, actually, before that, if you don't mind, I do also have a question that I would like to ask to Arianna and James on their model, and in particular the model that you have for software development, the life cycle model for research software engineering. And I think you briefly touched upon it, but it's also relevant, I believe, for potential participants to your masterclass, which is on which scale do you think this is applicable? Do you think this is applicable from starting with very small project, even with a one-person kind of research engineer projects, which we know are very many, especially in the humanities and digital humanities, or do you think it makes more sense for larger groups?
I can take it I can start, James, and maybe I can add. Yes, thanks for the question. So I thought that in terms of that software development life cycle, that diagram that I shared before, the two areas where most likely the masterclass will focus the most are the pre-project. So the area where a concept, an idea becomes a project, if you like. So especially the requirement elicitation and the requirement assessment and definitions, and then also the evolutionary development part. So in terms of the pre-project, I think, for example, one of the techniques that we tend to use quite a lot and are useful no matter how big your project is or how small it is the Moscow technique for prioritizing requirements. Very simple, very basic. We've also tested and used it with students, for example. So that would be something that it's applicable across, in fact, also across very different type of project, also project done digital. But obviously the examples that we will use and the kind of applicability will be taught through with a digital project in mind. So that phase of yes, transforming, evolving an idea into a digital project will definitely be relevant at different scale. And then the evolutionary development methods and aspect, those obviously are a little bit more focused towards, in general, a collaborative team. With a focus on planning the increments for a project and documenting and reviewing a project and so on. But that said, again, the idea of adapting templates for iterations and review is the kind of thing that you can also adapt to smaller or also individual projects. So some of the practices there, I would hope, will become relevant independently in a way of how big your team is or how many projects you are working on. So hopefully it would be relevant for different type of audiences. I don't know, James, whether you wanted to say anything.
We talk quite a lot in the lab about the problem of what is a quality digital output, in philosophical terms. And now my take is that the SDLC is the same as scholarly methods for producing a monograph. There's an analogy there. And that when we're graduate students, we get taught as a historian how to go through your research process, how to do your footnotes and all that good practice. And that applies to a single authored monograph as equally as it does to a multi-authored monograph. So in that sense, Arianna's touched on the engineering side of this. There's a scholarly side as well, which is an assumption and might be a bias. But it's my feeling that the SDLC equates to scholarly digital method, and it's best practice that should be applied in any circumstance, obviously tailored. But the reason for doing that is the same reason that you apply methodology in the analog world, is to give you space to think about the important aspects of the output in a structured way. So it's not just thinking about engineering and finance and budgets. It's also about research methods, but also values. I mean, Mia, you reminded me of the importance of values to our lab. Our socio-technical and SDLC sort of methods are connected through values, technical values, but also scholarly values. So yeah, I would say absolutely yes. I think it definitely needs to be tailored. It's a Lego box of methods, but they're scholarly methods as much as engineering ones.
Fantastic, thank you. Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense, and therefore everybody, research engineers, even in one-person team, this is very relevant to you. So I'd like to take a couple of questions that I see from the chat. Really, these are quite open, so anyone please jump in. One is from Jim and Timlin, that they're asking whether, so we really are trying to have these masterclasses in person, right? Because we think there is, of course, value to that and to be able to connect. But naturally now, I mean, it has become apparent that there are also advantages to having at least a digital component. I confess I haven't thought too much about it because I was very focused on going in person if possible. But yeah, it makes sense to perhaps to at least think about it in order to involve people that geographically cannot be there, or to leave digital traces that can be reused. I don't know whether you have ideas on that, perhaps also in view of our COVID experience.
I feel relatively lucky in a way so far that I haven't had to try and manage a hybrid event. I think by spring we'll know a lot more about how they work, because in the university sector in the UK is looking at some interesting combinations of in-person and online teaching. I have a lot of questions about how the dynamic might work and what kind of experience people might have remotely. I think having an interactive experience remotely would be a lot more difficult than simply accessing the content of the class. But also, Jim, in your case, you came to the Hilt Summer School a couple of years ago, and I think the same principles will still apply. So you wouldn't be missing out too much on the crowdsourcing one specifically, but perhaps with the others, it's a different question.
I think it would be, it would give people who live far away or don't have access, the possibility to travel, a way of, I think that I would ask participants to organize a kind of small group of people with which they are. So it's not a single person, but it's maybe a lecturer with a PhD or with another person. So you can talk to them and explain something, and then they do something together and report. So that the element of interactivity is there, but it's not on your lab. It's so I think that might be nicer than just being alone behind your screen. So I think I would do that, and just what I usually do with these kind of interventions is send a survey before. If I know who participates, I send a short survey so I know what the level. You don't waste time figuring out what the level is and you already can tweak what you have to the expectations and the level of the people who come. And then you can ask them, okay, if you come, bring that and that so we can have a look at that. So I think this kind of preparation really makes the effort worthwhile. If you're completely fresh and you have one day, it's difficult to go beyond the usual. At least that's my experience.
Yeah. No, I fully agree. I think preparation is really key to that. Indeed.
I was going to add, maybe also connected to that, a good way. I mean, we'll have to see where we are in spring 2022. But in my experience, a good way is also balancing out the asynchronous and the synchronous. So not all the activities indeed will need to be synchronous. So we can make the best of the synchronous moment, whether they're face to face or not. But making sure indeed that either resources are shared beforehand, or maybe there are some elements of provocation or reflective inputs before and in an asynchronous mode, so that the synchronous can be more in depth, which I think is also the whole idea of the masterclass, to make it more interactive and based on the experiences of the participants.
Yeah.
I think just as a general comment, it's hard to know when our planning horizons will become more certain, because every time you think, oh, well, in a few months, we'll surely know more about what we can manage, that gets kicked out from under you. So hopefully in spring 2022, we'll be much more certain, but at this point, all bets are off.
Well, I can imagine that if by December Giovanni and don't have a clear view, that you then design a kind of backup option with you as the leader with someone else, and then at several points small groups, because that can really, I think that would be a reasonable alternative to give a kind of satisfying experience. So you could ask people from different universities or different to get together and exchange idea or write something together or come with the result of an assignment.
I think if we get to that point and we still need to be hybrid, we're just going to have to get stuck in and do it, aren't we? Or we'll everything will be on hold forever. I mean, we'd be able to tailor ours to a hybrid approach. I'd prefer either or. I agree with you. Don't hear good things about hybrid seminars. But perhaps a data exhaust, perhaps that's a good way to go. So you just sort of record as much as you can, but focus on the in-person side of it, and the digital is what it is. But again, if there's uncertainty at that point, I think we'll just get stuck in and make it happen.
I have a follow-up remark to what Julia remarked. In your cycle, in your path, I think that it would be very useful, even without very lengthy explanation of worst case scenarios, to mark at each step what could go wrong. So that, I don't know, with let's say an interactive element that you click on it and you can say, at this stage, what often happens is this and this and this, because that, how to say, you're setting out a kind of ideal, typical scheme, and real life is never like that.
Well, that's how the SDLC evolves, actually, and it's iterated over time. Because
so I think that people might recognize themselves in what goes wrong, and then you can tell them, okay, in these cases you can prevent this by doing this and this and this.
Yeah, that's really how it's evolved. So, for instance, we have a service level agreement before go live, because if we don't, X, Y, and Z happens, and we experience that. And each step in the SDLC has a story like that around it. And in fact, I was going to answer in the chat, but it would have been too long. Julia's question about that is great. I mean, we embrace failure, and we pride ourselves on we'd like to be more open about it, actually. I mean, this is what,
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, what's the advice to actors? Never work with children or animals. The advice to humanists should be never work with technology, because it is you're just solving problems. It's a problem-solving exercise. So failure sort of goes with the territory. But equally, because we inherited 100 projects, a lot of the lab, the way that it evolved, it sort of evolved out of these tectonic pressures between the failures that we inherited and were implicit in. I used to work like that as well. And the lab is just sort of formed under these pressures, these tectonic pressures. So for every solution that we have in the lab, I would say, I don't know what you think, Arianna, but just about every one, we could point to a failure that it's a response to. And it's like whack-a-mole, you fix that and another failure springs up somewhere else. So it's this constant process. And that's sort of a view of the lab as an organic socio-technical entity. It's not something rigid. It's something organic that lives within its socio-technical context and has to adapt to it.
Yeah, maybe the only thing I would add is that indeed the idea of that itinerary, which you describe as being the perfect itinerary, is actually a way to cope with resilience, if you like. So how to manage change and how to face it in such a way so that whatever within some limitations, changes happen, and how you manage them. That's really what it boils down to. So, but yes, it'll be really interesting, I think, to possibly identify some pinpoint some elements of failure.
Yeah. So so that, and I think even in the outreach with your scheme, if you have that possibility, what can go wrong, people will be more attracted to it. Because,
so go ahead.
Because then, you know, you're transparent and you relate to real, how to say, lived experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And what this conversation's reminding me of too is this danger of over-engineering. I mean, we certainly don't want to present the lab as a success, because the more you know, we actually have an ethnographer with us at the moment, writing a monograph about the lab, and it's really interesting.
So you're being observed.
Yeah, absolutely, and we want that because we have expert blindness, and we're blind to everything. So we really embrace that process. But it reminds me that, you know, one of our warnings about the lab is that there's this tendency to over-engineer as well, which kills creativity and kills the research process. So actually, at a certain point, you have to accept failure. And so, you know, we could put in another brace to stop that potential failure because it's happened 3 times, but you know, that's going to kill something else. So it's all about balance. And I love the idea of failure being a driving force.
And if I may just add one small point, that especially if it's a collaborative project, a failure for one partner might be a success for another. Yeah. So that's another element to take into account.
Fair enough. Yeah. Okay, super. I'm sorry to cut through the conversation, but I'm mindful of time, and I think we should try to finish by the hour. But by the way, point taken about not postponing furthermore our masterclasses, so it will be spring 2022 in one form or another. I think I'll spend summer thinking that we will be able to do them in person, and then we will see in the fall what happens and plan accordingly. Okay, so I think we can bring this to a close, and I would really like to thank you all, our speakers and experts, first of all, and then organizers, and indeed all of you that joined us today. We will share the recordings in due course soon enough, and then after summer you will definitely know more about, you know, the actual planning of the actual masterclasses. Until then, I wish everybody pleasant everything, and in particular summer, hopefully outside and without too much worrying about COVID. And I hope to see you all soon again. Very nice day.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. It's been great.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Giovanni.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Bye-bye.